pretty remarkable considering how late we were all out last night. And we had our first candidates, what do we call it? I guess the first program where all five of the Democratic Party candidates were on the stage at the same time in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And the people of Iowa, after seeing 16 or 17 Republican candidates for the last couple of months, were so relieved to have a different conversation. So it was a good night.
Oh, I'm really going to give an introduction first.
Want to give an introduction?
Yeah, you can close it. Yeah, that's fine.
No, look, let me give a brief introduction. My name is Martin O'Malley. I am the former governor of Maryland, a former mayor of Baltimore. All right, Maryland in the house. And I'm running for president, and I need your help. I believe that the genius of our country, in a nutshell, is this: that in every generation, we find ways to take actions that actually allow and empower more of our people to participate more fully in the economic, the social, and the political life of our nation. That is not only the genius of our society and of our character, it is also what made us the land of opportunity through 240 years of the practice of the sort of economics that allow us to actually grow our middle class, expand opportunity, and increase prosperity in every generation. Call it the American dream, if you will. Call it progress. I believe that progress is a choice. And over the last 30 to 40 years, we've been making mostly different choices. And they are not in keeping with that formula for progress. So as mayor and as governor, I instead adopted policies that allowed more of our people to more fully participate. And we created a better economic model because of it. During my time as governor, we not only became the first state to pass a living wage, we also passed the minimum wage and raised it to $10.10. And we raised it to $12.80 in a couple of counties like Montgomery and Prince George's. And I believe that as a nation, we should be raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour whenever and wherever we can. There are many other things that we need to do as well to rebuild the American dream. And rather than giving you a speech about it, we will talk about it. But if one of the most jarring things that's happened in our country, and I ask this question everywhere, Jose, show of hands, how many of you believe very firmly you've enjoyed a better quality of life than your parents and grandparents? Raise your hands. How many of you believe just as firmly that your children and your grandchildren will enjoy a better quality of life than you have? Raise your hands. I'll tell you what, this is a more optimistic group than most. I asked that question in Polk County in Des Moines, Iowa. 350 people, Democrats. Only 5 people raised their hand to that second question. Because this is the first decade, this side of World War II, that wages for 75% of us have either been flatlining or going down. And if we want wages to go up, then yes, we have to do things like putting wage policies in the center of our considerations. We have to return to our true selves. We have to remember that our economy is not money. Our economy is people. It's all of us. So look, in conclusion here, I was governor. We also extended prevailing wage. We made it easier for people to bargain collectively and join unions. We did more, not less, to improve public education and to make college more affordable for more people, going 4 years in a row without a penny's increase in college tuition. And along the way, we also found ways to do more to invest in our infrastructure, our broadband, to connect all of us, and to restore the health of the Chesapeake Bay. And we also did a few other things as well. We passed the DREAM Act for all of the kids in Maryland. We passed marriage equality and defended it in the ballot box. We were the first state to do that. So these are the things that a free people chooses to do. Not just words, but action. There are many of us running in the Democratic Party for president. who espouse progressive goals and progressive values. But I am the only candidate in this race with 15 years of executive experience in some of the toughest places and through the toughest times, actually taking those progressive goals and values and putting them into action to achieve better results for our citizens. And that's what we need to do as a country. New leadership to get things done and to choose progress again. Thanks.
I really want to get to this. Thanks to Twitter, I really kind of want to get to this right away. The morning that you announced that you were running for president, mostly black Baltimoreans heckled you, right, during that announcement, and they started talking about your record, the fact that there have been more than 100,000 arrests in 2005, you know, and ACLU actually sued and was sent over the city. What do you say to people? There was a quote that I read in an article that said, O'Malley, quote, is the father of mass incarceration in Baltimore City, and there was no great economic upswing for minorities during the time. So what do you say, you know, we cannot talk about immigrant rights and LGBT rights and not talk about Black Lives Matter. So we can all talk about that. Senator Warren did a great speech about this last night. But back to your point, no more talk, actions. So from a legislative perspective, from an action perspective, as president, how would you put forth and support legislation that really proves to black people and non-black people that Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, let me unpack many of the things that were contained in your opening questions and statements, one of which is patently untrue. On the day of my announcement, we had a great crowd on Federal Hill, and it was probably the most diverse crowd that any presidential candidate of his or her announcement has had. I was the mayor of Baltimore for 7 years, and far from being heckled on that day, we had a great crowd. And in fact, one of the people that began that program was Mr. Robert Nolan at Penn Lucie.
Yeah, I saw that.
So,
no, but sir, but there were people that were definitely, you know, organized.
Yeah, there were like 3 or 4. From my standpoint, I think most of them were white. Okay. But if you saw more that day, I didn't see them.
Okay. But outside of that, let's talk about
yes,
exactly. Yes.
Because look, everybody, there are very few issues in our country that are quite as painfully intertwined as the legacy of violence, race, and law enforcement in America. When I ran for mayor in 1999, our city had allowed ourselves to become the most violent and addicted city in America. One year in that run-up, we had 352 murders. And black lives do matter. And most of them were young, and they were poor, and they were black. And if they were young, and they were poor, and they were white, we would not have shrugged our shoulders to that.
So how do you address that now? Like what kind of policies? You know, the president yesterday
Can I unravel a little bit of this because you had a whole lot in your statement that I want to respond to. When I was elected, I stood on a drug-free corner, and euphemistically, we used to call them free drug corners, because the commissioner of police used to publish the metes and the bounds of it in the paper every month as required by city ordinance, but they never changed. And in fact, the one I announced when I announced for mayor, it had been there for so long that all of the signs were yellowed and faded. So I promised people, vote for me, and we will start rolling back the open-air drug markets that had laid siege on a 24/7 basis to neighborhoods of people who were of color and poor. And we used to say that, in Baltimore in those days, if you called from a wealthier neighborhood, black or white, the police always came, and they always got out of the car. But if you called from a poor neighborhood that was black, they hardly ever came, and they never got out of the car. So we did 4 things all at once. We improved policing. We improved how we police the police. We greatly and dramatically increased drug treatment, and we intervened earlier in the lives of young people. And not only did we put Baltimore on a path to achieve the biggest crime reduction that decade of any major city in America, but we also improved police and community relations. And the 3 years in modern Baltimore history where we achieved the lowest numbers of police-involved shootings were 3 years that I was mayor. Another point you made was you talked about my being the father of mass arrest policing.
That was yes.
Yep. From the first day that I announced, first day, being white in a majority African-American city, where I started that campaign, by the way, against two very well-known opponents, both of whom were black. One had 90% name recognition, one had 80% name recognition. And with 88 days to go, when Kwesi Mfume decided not to run for mayor, I started with a whopping 7%. I was the first choice of a whopping 7% of my neighbors. But we won every single one of those 6 council districts. But from the first day I announced, there were those small groups of people at home who said, if O'Malley's ever elected mayor, there'll be riots in Baltimore. Like from the very first day I announced. But I was reelected with 88% of the vote of the people 4 years later. Because far from bringing forward the mass arrest, mass incarceration policing that you're talking about, I actually made policing more responsive. We did 100 reverse integrity stings a year. We fully staffed a civilian review board. I'm not done. We actually put 2 detectives onto civilian review board so they could investigate these things and incidents of police-involved brutality, discourtesy. We used technology in order to set up flags so that if an officer out there was racking up several complaints over a short period of time, we'd bring him or her in and say, we got to have a talk, and we do the intervention. So look, this is, all of us, I believe, have a responsibility to become smarter every single day in terms of public safety policies and tougher every single day on the causes of crime like extreme poverty. So,
let me follow up on this. So, what do you say to people, because it's blowing up on Twitter, what do you say to people moving forward, right? If you were to talk to black organizers, black activists who are wondering, what would President O'Malley do that is not being done now? What would that be?
I would work very hard to eliminate the sentencing disparities, especially on things like crack and powder, marijuana, and Jose, I've been all around this. I was my first 2 years out of law school. I was a prosecutor, and then during the 8 years I was on the Baltimore City Council, I was a defense attorney. So there's not another candidate in this race that's dealt with these issues quite as much as I have. We also need to do a lot more on reentry. During my time as governor, we cut recidivism by 15%, and we consciously reduced our incarceration rate and population to 20-year lows in Maryland. I restored voting rights to 52,000 people with felonies. We abolished the death penalty. And in my first 54 days in office, we closed down the largest and most notorious and violent prison in our state, the Maryland House of Corrections. And over the arc of those 15 years of both mayoral and gubernatorial service, we probably saved at least 1,000 young black lives by improving public safety policies, public safety actions, and also greatly dialing up drug treatment until we got whacked in the end with this heroin epidemic from the pills.
So let me go to another topic, and I'm saying this as an undocumented person, and I'm saying this as a journalist. You have put out the most specific, right, and the broadest immigration proposal of any presidential candidate in this cycle. And I think you ought to be commended for that. But I have some questions about this. Since we are in Arizona, for the profit detention industry that's earning billions of dollars locking up immigrants. Now, people may not know this. There's a congressional quota that requires detention centers to fill 34,000 beds a night at taxpayers' expense to imprison undocumented people in this country. That's a quota. Would love to hear your concrete plan of how do you address that? How do you address this federal immigrant bed quota?
I think that kind of runs contrary to the Constitution for any House of Representatives or any law to direct the executive branch to fill up a minimum amount of bed spaces, detaining people against their will without voluntary arrest. I would have to assume as an executive that that's simply a directive to maintain a certain number of beds, not necessarily to have them filled. I'm opposed to for-profit prisons. I think in fact, I'm not thrilled about public prisons. level of enforcement that we had in Baltimore in order to roll back the open-air drug markets and free our neighbors from the terror of drug dealers. Somebody said, oh, you arrested 100,000 people in a single year in a city of 650,000 people. They were the same 10,000 guys. Again and again and again until they got the word that we're not going to write off our poor neighborhoods to that sort of low standard of justice. And over time, that level of enforcement has come down greatly. In fact, probably last year was the lowest level of enforcement or arrests in Baltimore in 30 or 40 years.
Yesterday, Senator Warren was here.
Can I have some of your...
Oh, no, please, yeah.
You just got to ask when you're in the West.